All right. And we're live. We're live on YouTube. Good morning. Welcome to the fucking news read along. We're going over the one big beautiful bill, the 50-page version. This is part 6. We're starting on page 29, actually, which is going to be part 3, investing in the health of rural America and Main Street. If you are watching on TikTok or Instagram, make sure you go to youtube.com/Kellerman Comedy, comedy with a K, and that's where you can see the whole show. Welcome back, Black Sheep. You are the man. Thank you. You're still marked as a moderator, so thank you for keeping an eye on all the riffraff. Okay, moving on to section 111201. Expanding the definition of rural emergency hospital under the Medicare. You sent me a DM. I'm not sure I saw it. Send me another one. Send me another one today. Are you DMing me on Instagram? I hope so. All right. I'll try to find you. Under the current law, only certain hospitals that were enrolled in Medicare as of December 27, 2020 are eligible to convert to the Rural Emergency Hospital designation. This provision establishes a look back from January 1st, 2014 to December 26, 2020, such that qualifying rural hospitals opened during that time but have since closed may reopen under the REH designation. Such hospitals that are located less than 35 miles from the nearest hospital, Critical Access Hospital, or REH, are not eligible for the 5% increase on outpatient payments. Such facilities that are located less than 10 miles from the nearest hospital, CAH or REH, are not eligible for the REH facility fee. Well, there's not much of a mention of the facility fee. Sorry, that's actually from yesterday's part. So just to make sure we all understand, what is the REH facility fee? We're just gonna Google it. Because, that's what I think a lot of people fail to do. They don't just look shit up. So the Rural Emergency Hospital facility fee is a monthly payment made to REHs, to the hospitals, by Medicare. It is an additional payment separate from the standard Medicare outpatient prospective payment system. Payments for REH services. In 2023, the monthly REH facility fee was $272,866, and it increases annually based on the hospital market basket percentage increase. Now, the health industry is pretty wonky, all right, in the United States. But it looks like this is just about being designated as a rural emergency hospital. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to just explain this like I'm stupid in case I'm not understanding something. But this seems kind of basic and only seems to change, what hospitals are designated as. Welcome, James Malwitz, U.S. service member from Germany. Okay, so the current rule is that only rural hospitals that were already in the Medicare program on December 27, 2020 can switch over to become a rural emergency hospital, a special type of small emergency-focused hospital. In the new change, they're saying, let's go back and look at all the hospitals that were open any time from 2014 to the end of 2020, even if they closed before that 2020 deadline. If those rural hospitals closed but were open during the time window, they might be allowed to reopen and become an REH. So there are two catches here. If you're less than 35 miles from another hospital, you won't get the extra 5% bonus on Medicare payments for outpatient services. If you're less than 10 miles from another hospital, if you're less than 10 miles, you can get the extra monthly facility fee that REH usually receives. In short, they're letting some closed rural hospitals reopen as emergency-only hospitals. But if they're too close to another hospital, they don't get all the extra money that usually comes with being an REH. I'm just wondering, does this positively or negatively impact, we'll say rural communities? sounds like it would be a benefit to them if things can. The change mostly has a positive impact on rural communities, though it's not perfect. Here's an explanation in plain terms. So, the positive impacts are that more hospitals can reopen. That's good. Rural areas that lost their hospitals between 2014 and 2020 now get a chance to bring them back as rural emergency hospitals. This means closer emergency care for people who otherwise might have to drive an hour or more to the nearest hospital, which gives them better access to emergency care. Thank you, everybody. If you're wondering on YouTube, that sound was people on TikTok giving me awards. Thank you. Thank you for the gifts, guys. I appreciate you guys helping me, make an extra 20 cents on TikTok. It's not much, but it's better than nothing, right? We like 20 cents. That's about how much I make on each of these lives. If any of you are wondering or considering being a content creator, it's not very profitable. Anyways, so to finish this up, local jobs return. Reopening hospitals helps bring back healthcare jobs and boost the local economy in small towns that lost major employers. Limitations or potential negatives are less financial support if close to another hospital. If the rural hospital is too close to another facility, it won't get bonus Medicare payments, making it harder to stay open or profitable. Emergency only equals limited service. REHs don't offer full inpatient care or overnight stays, so patients needing more serious treatment still have to be transferred elsewhere. And not all closed hospitals are eligible. Only those that were open between 2014 and 2020 can come back. The rest are left out. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to say, is there any way that this benefits the wealthy more than the less wealthy? Just see what it says. The policy mostly benefits rural, lower-income communities, but there are a few indirect ways that wealthier stakeholders could benefit more than the communities it's meant to serve. Here's the breakdown. It mainly helps lower-income communities because the rural areas are often poorer, older, and more medically underserved. This provision is about reopening small hospitals in those places, so it directly aims to help low-income and elderly rural residents get emergency care closer to home. Wealthier people in urban or suburban areas aren't usually affected by rural hospital closures, so they don't directly benefit from this law. But here's how it could indirectly benefit wealthier people in some situations. Hospital investors or owners. If a private equity firm, hospital corporation, or wealthy investor buys up a closed rural hospital, they can reopen it as an REH and bill Medicare. But that's a good thing. It's still a good thing if they reopen a hospital or an REH. Even without inpatient services, REHs get facility fees and outpatient payments, a potential revenue stream. Okay, so this is like if you own a hospital, you may be able to get some payment from Medicaid because you're helping people in rural areas. Wealthy owners could profit, especially in areas where they're the only provider, right? But again, if it's an area where they're the only provider, then it is essential that hospital stay open. So I feel like it still benefits the people who would use the hospital more than the people. If you're wealthy enough to own a hospital, it's not like owning the hospital is more beneficial to you than it is the people who are treated at the hospital. That's just, we'll call that a win-win. Larger health systems might be able to leverage this law for financial or tax incentives, while smaller community-run hospitals may struggle to compete. Yeah, but as long as there are hospitals open in areas we need them, it's a good thing, guys. I don't really know how else it could be seen. So while the intent is to help underserved rural areas, the profits generated from this policy could still flow disproportionately to wealthy stakeholders. I don't even understand why it would put it this way. You are never going to make profit by going to a hospital. The patients that hospitals help don't profit off of the hospital. All right. So anyways, moving on. Subtitle C, Make America Win Again. Part 1, Working Families Over Elites. Section 112001, Termination of Previously Owned Clean Vehicle Credit. So under the current law, taxpayers may claim a tax credit for previously owned clean vehicles. The credit is worth the lesser of $4,000 or 30% of the sale price and is limited to incomes of $75,000 for single filers or $112,000 for head of household filers and $150,000 for joint filers. The credit is set to expire in 2032. This provision accelerates the expiration to the end of this year. So basically they're getting rid of the clean vehicle credit. But that's more of like a environmental thing, right? Then it's not helping the wealthy per se. Explain like I'm stupid and include who benefits or loses the most. Big pharma and medical companies do not own hospitals, I don't think. They work with hospitals. So, if you buy a user electric clean energy car, the government might give you a tax credit. Basically, it knocks some money off your taxes. Okay, so you could get a $4,000 credit, but only if it's 30% or less of the sale price. So if the car costs $10,000, you would get $3,000, not the full $1,000, whichever is smaller. $4,000 or 30% of what you paid. Who qualifies? Only people who make under a certain amount of income, right? So who benefits the most? The environment. Also used EV sellers and dealers. Okay, so who doesn't benefit, blah, blah, blah. If you're not rich and want a used electric car, the government will give you up to... Okay, so... Basically, you just don't get clean energy car tax credits anymore. There's no incentive to buy a clean energy vehicle anymore. Okay, moving on. Section 112002, Termination of Clean Vehicle Credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a tax credit of up to $7,500 for clean new vehicles. This is for new vehicles instead of used vehicles, right? So this provision accelerates the expiration to the end of this year. This provision also implements a special rule for taxable year 2026 that only allows vehicles produced by manufacturers that have not sold 200,000 new clean vehicles as of December 31st, 2025 to qualify for the credit. You know who that excludes, surprisingly? Tesla. Tesla sells new clean energy vehicles. However, they sell more than 200,000 a year, so they are not going to be able to take advantage of this credit, which is a little surprising. You'd think he'd try to help out his old buddy Elon. All right, section 112003, termination of qualified commercial clean vehicle credit. Okay, this is a credit that was going to commercially used vehicles. Basically, it seems like we're just getting rid of all the credits for clean energy vehicles. I'm going to check my understanding here just to make sure. Briefly explain like I'm stupid and include who benefits the most versus who loses the most. So if a business buys a clean energy vehicle like the electric truck or van, the government gives them a big tax break. $7,500 for small vehicles, $40,000 for big vehicles, but the credit was going to last until 2032, and now it doesn't. The credit will end at the end of this year. However, if a business signs a contract before then they still get the credit. even if the vehicle arrives later. So it's like if you buy it within this year, then you're still going to get that credit, even though it technically ends at the end of this year. So businesses that act fast now, they can lock in big tax savings before the credit ends. Electric vehicle manufacturers might see a short-term rush in orders. Great. Who loses the most? Businesses that wait too long, clean energy advocates, and environment. So less long-term incentive to switch to clean vehicles. There's just less incentive. Clean energy vehicles will still be around. I think that they'll even potentially still continue gaining popularity, but they're not. It's not going to be as incentivized moving forward. Continuing on, Section 112004, termination of alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a tax credit for advanced refueling property placed in service in a given taxable year. The credit value is 30% of the cost of the property, not exceeding $100,000. The credit expires in 2032. This simply accelerates the expiration to 2025. So this is clean termination of alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit. My guess is that impacts, tax incentives for people who put up like refueling stations. Basically, I'm just gonna ask ChatGPT to explain it like I'm stupid. Are those limits taxable income? Some say this will slow progress in innovation, but it actually slows the changeover down to a pace that can be adjusted to by the infrastructure. I would agree with that. Because we were heading towards a place where you basically just had to have an electric car at some point, but there aren't really enough electric car stations to accommodate everybody owning an electric car yet. Now, obviously, on the flip side of that, we could go the other way, and people who, we could just start selling so few electric vehicles. But, that's where the innovation comes in. We need to innovate the electric vehicle so that it is the better option, right? That's kind of the whole idea here. So if you install advanced refueling equipment like an electric vehicle charging station or hydro fuel pump, the government will give you a tax credit, basically money off your taxes. You get 30% back up to $100,000 per item. This was supposed to last until 2032. Now it just ends at the end of the year. So if you blah, 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 you used to have until 2032 to get a tax break for building clean fuel stations. And now you only have till the end of 2025. After that, you can still do it. You just don't get a tax break. So that will be much less incentivized, which is unfortunate for the environment, probably, but also, I'm sure that was making it difficult for certain businesses to operate in some ways. Okay. Section 112005, termination of energy efficient home improvement credit. Under this law, taxpayers may claim a tax credit for household energy efficient improvements. The value of the credit is 30% of qualified energy efficient improvements, residential energy property, or home energy audits not exceeding $1,200 annually. This provision accelerates the expiration to the end of this year. Again, this is the same thing. You used to get a tax credit if you added a solar panel or a EV charging machine to your home. Now you just don't get that tax credit. You can still do it. Hopefully they make it more affordable. Hopefully the manufacturers make it more affordable, and that's how they incentivize you to go that way. But this just makes it so you don't get a tax credit. Specifically, the government doesn't have to lose money just because you decided to go clean energy, which I still encourage people to do if they're able to. Section 112006, termination of residential clean energy credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a credit for residential expenditures for solar, electrical. This is the same thing, but for solar panels specifically. I actually just mentioned it in my description of the previous thing. So, again, this simply accelerates the expiration to December 31st, 2025. So if you're going to get solar panels for your home and you want a tax credit for it, do it now. Do it before the end of 2025. Section 112007, termination of new energy efficient home credit. So under the current law, contractors may claim a credit for homes built that meet certain Energy Star standards. Homes that are considered zero energy ready are eligible for a $5,000 credit, and homes certified at a lower energy efficient level are eligible for a credit, either $2,500 or $1,000. The credit expires 2032. This provision accelerates the expiration to the end of this year. This provision includes a special rule allowing homes that have commenced construction before May 12th, 2025, which means it's currently June 3rd, so you will have already had to do this, to qualify for the credit if they are acquired by December 31st, 2026. This seems like it incentivizes contractors to build homes more energy efficiently. What a weird credit. I feel like you should just be able to request that. You don't need a credit to incentivize it, but it did incentivize it, and now it doesn't. So goodbye to that incentive. Section 112008. Phase out and restrictions on clean electricity production credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a credit for electricity produced and sold by a qualifying facility. For the purposes of this section, a qualified facility is one that is determined to have a greenhouse gas emissions less than zero. The value of the credit is 0.3 cents per kilowatt hour generally, or 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour if a taxpayer meets prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements or exceptions in constructing, repairing, or altering the qualified facility. The credit applies for 10 years after a qualified facility is placed in service. To the extent a taxpayer does not have the tax liability to absorb a credit, the credits are eligible to be transferred to an unrelated taxpayer. This credit currently has no expiration. So under the new provision, this provision phases out the clean electricity production credit. There is a 20% credit reduction for facilities placed in service in calendar year 2029, a 40% reduction for facilities placed in service in calendar year 2030, a 60% reduction for facilities placed in service in calendar year 2031, and zero credit available after 2031. Transferability is repealed for facilities where construction begins 2 years after the date of enactment of this bill. So this provision restricts access to credit for certain prohibited foreign entities. Specifically, no credit is allowed for a facility that commences construction a year after enactment of this bill that includes any material assistance from a prohibited foreign entity. That's important. 2. No credit is allowed for taxable years beginning after enactment if the taxpayer is a specified foreign entity. And 3. No credit is allowed for taxpayers that begin 2 years after the date of enactment for foreign influence entities, or if the taxpayer makes fixed, determinable, annual, or periodic amount payments to a prohibited foreign entity that are more than 5% of total expenditures related to the credit generated activity, or 15% in aggregate. Did you guys get all that? This provision also includes the definitions of several terms related to prohibited foreign entities. So there's specified foreign entity, which is a foreign entity of concern as described in the William M. Thornberry National Defense Authorization Act of FY 2021. Chinese military companies operating in the U.S., any entity on a list required by the strategy to enforce prohibition on imported goods made through forced labor in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, an entity listed as ineligible for Department of Defense battery acquisition in the National Defense Authorization Act of FY 2024, or a foreign-controlled entity. Now, there's a lot in there that I've never heard of before. So let's look into some of these things real quick. We're just going to pause on the One Big Beautiful Bill, and we're just going to get a quick explanation of what some of these things are. Explain in 1 to 2 sentences. All right, so the William M. Thornberry National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2021 is a U.S. federal law that authorizes $740 billion for military activities, including Department of Defense operations, military construction, and defense-related programs of the Department of Energy. Okay. What is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region? Anybody know what that is before I look it up? Okay, this is China's largest province-level division, located in the country's northwest. It shares borders with 8 countries, including Kazakhstan, Pakistan, India, and serves as a vital hub for China's Belt and Road Initiative. The region is home to approximately 26 million people, with Uyghurs, a predominantly Muslim Turkic-speaking ethnic group comprising about 45% of the population, and Han Chinese making up around 42%. This is where a lot of sweatshops are. This is forced labor, is what is being discussed here in the actual bill. And the National Defense Authorization Act of 2024 is... I'm sorry, am I totally mispronouncing that word? Uyghurs? The National Defense Authorization Act of 2024 is a U.S. federal law authorizing $886 billion in defense spending, including provisions for military pay raises, procurement of equipment, and policies addressing national security concerns. It's a lot of money, guys. It's doubling. It's doubling from 2021 to 2024. Okay, foreign controlled entities, yep, foreign influenced entities, these are all kind of self-explanatory. Material assistance from prohibited foreign entities, right, you can't buy wood from communist China and then get a tax credit on the wood. That's basically what it's saying. I'm still, because that was a lot, I'm just going to have AI boil it down for us. Yeah, there is an NDAA every year or two. It's part of the budget. That makes sense. It keeps going up, though. The amount was the amount from 2021 just not enough? So, if you build a clean power plant, this is for people who can build a clean power plant, which means that it is primarily going to impact the wealthy and then in different ways trickle down. Not financially, but, if big companies destroy the environment, that impacts everybody, right? So currently, if you build a clean power plant, the government will give you money back in the form of a tax credit. What's changing? So they're phasing it out. So this will be a sort of a slow going away. You get 20% less for factories built in 2029, 40% less in 2030, 60% less in 2031, and then eventually there is no tax credit for building this type of facility. Also, you can't sell or transfer the credit if construction starts 2 years after this bill becomes law, and you can't claim the credit at all if your project uses money, parts, or tech from certain foreign enemies like China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea. Also, if a company is owned or heavily influenced by those countries, they also can't take advantage. So who benefits the most? U.S.-based clean energy companies. They can build fast, use American materials, and still get the full tax credit. Workers in the U.S., projects that pay prevailing wages and use apprentices to get higher tax credits, and national security policymakers keeps foreign adversaries like China and Russia out of U.S. energy projects. Who loses the most? Clean energy developers who wait too long. Right, you don't get a tax credit if you wait until 2031 to start your facility. Foreign-controlled or foreign-influenced companies lose. Projects relying on foreign parts or tech lose. Companies that need to sell the credit. Transferability goes away, right? So they can't sell their credit. That's interesting. It's interesting that you can sell a government credit, right? Shouldn't you just You can either take advantage of the credit or not. You shouldn't be able to sell the tax credit. That seems like some kind of rich person loophole to me. The U.S. gives clean energy tax credits, but soon they'll get smaller. I'm just going to ask it to predict whether this would have a positive or negative impact on the United States. Now, obviously, I'm asking AI to make a prediction, so what it's about to tell me is in no way a fact. It is simply a prediction based on more information than I personally have, right? So the positive impacts are national security, obviously, jobs in domestic manufacturing. It encourages clean energy companies to use American workers and materials, and rewards companies that meet fair labor standards. And there's an urgency boost, right? So people will start manufacturing sooner because by the end of 2029, they no longer get this clean energy tax credit. The negative impacts: fewer clean energy projects long term. Phasing out the credit before 2032 removes a key financial incentive which could slow clean energy expansion. Could, not definitely. Higher costs for projects. Restricting parts and tech from foreign sources like China will raise the cost for clean energy systems, since China currently dominates global solar, wind, and battery markets. Without cheap inputs, projects may become too expensive or get canceled. Environmental impact. Slower clean energy growth means slower reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which undermines U.S. climate goals. But the U.S. doesn't have those same climate goals under the Trump administration, right? So, not a big setback as far as they're concerned. So, outcomes. Short term, slight positive due to the project rush potential, and long term, negative because the credits fade, cost rises, growth slows. The final take: positive for national security and U.S. jobs, negative for clean energy affordability, growth, and emissions cuts. So moderately negative overall, unless replaced with a new long-term energy policy, which that could happen. All right, moving on. Section 112009, phase out and restrictions on clean electricity investment credit. This sounds pretty similar to what I was just talking about. So, under the current law, there is a credit for qualified investment in electricity facility or energy storage technology. So this is the same thing, except factories specifically regarding energy production and storage. So this provision restricts access to the credit for certain prohibited foreign entities. Specifically, no credit is allowed for a facility that commences construction a year after enactment. No credit is allowed for taxable years beginning after the enactment. Taxpayer specified foreign entity. Yep. It's the same stuff. Same as the last one, but specifically for energy production facilities. Section 112010, repeal of transferability of clean fuel production credit. Under the current law, to the extent a taxpayer does not have the tax liability to absorb a credit, the clean fuel production credits are eligible to be transferred to an unrelated taxpayer. Wasn't this already mentioned in just the last one? They can't transfer the credit anymore. The provision eliminates transferability of The provision eliminates transferability for fuel produced after December 31st, 2027. Disincentivizes foreign investment in critical U.S. infrastructure is what James Malwitz says. I'm not sure that removing an incentive is the same thing as disincentivizing. Is disincentivizing even a word? Or would it be de-incentivizing? Regardless, removing an incentive is not the same thing as de-incentivizing. I guess it is the same thing as de-incentivizing it because you are unincentivizing it, but you are not pushing things in the opposite direction, right? It's not the same thing as incentivizing the opposite. God, I don't know where my mind is, guys. More coffee. Moving on. Section 112011, restrictions on carbon oxide sequestration credit. We're learning all kinds of new words today, guys. Sequestration obviously means the same thing as like sequestering. It's the Asian version of it. Um, Under current law, taxpayers may claim a credit available per metric ton of qualified carbon oxide captured and disposed of or used by a taxpayer in a given year beginning after 2016 and before 2027. The value of the credit is $17 per metric ton if the carbon oxide is utilized as a tertiary injectant and disposed of in secure geological storage, and $12 per metric ton if the taxpayer utilizes the carbon oxide by fixing it through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, chemically converting it to securely store it, or for another purpose for which a commercial market exists, and for the 12-year period after the equipment is placed in service. So, again, this seems like it really is going to impact people who own big corporations who deal with carbon oxide emissions, and not for the typical normal taxpayer. So let's just see who this impacts. Who is affected the most by the following provision? And what is its potential long-term impact? So what's changing? So no more selling the credit. Right. We're getting rid of selling your credits, okay? If you get a credit, you can use it. If you can't use it, it goes away, like a normal credit. Selling credit has got to be some kind of like business loophole that they've been using for a long time, right? Foreign, because I've never sold a credit. Foreign linked companies lose access, so immediately blocked if the company is a specified foreign entity like China or Russia. Blocked after 2 years if it's a foreign influenced entity. Right, okay. So, who is affected the most by this? Startups and small U.S. carbon capture firms. They often can't use the credit themselves, so they rely on selling it. Losing that option hurts the financing of small U.S. carbon capturing firms. Anybody able to name a carbon capturing firm? Name 5 U.S. carbon capturing firms. Foreign-backed clean tech firms and private equity or joint ventures with foreign investors. Okay, great. So who benefits? Large U.S.-owned carbon capture companies. They can still use the credit and face less competition from foreign-owned firms. Okay, so we're removing the foreign element of this. Obviously, that's going to help U.S.-based companies. U.S. national security and supply chain policymakers, reduces foreign strategic influence, especially from China and Russia. And taxpayers and federal budget are benefited because fewer entities qualifying may reduce costs to government in the long run. Potential long-term impact. Clean tech growth in the U.S. Slows due to reduced financing options, no transferability, especially for smaller and early-stage projects. Climate progress could delay deployment of carbon capture solutions, especially DAC at scale, harming U.S. climate goals. Again, these climate goals are not the same anymore. Increases U.S. security over energy and tech infrastructure, which is good, and less attractive for foreign investors. Right. So in simple terms, the rule hurts small U.S. clean energy firms and foreign-linked companies by taking away their ability to sell their carbon credits or qualify for them. It helps big U.S.-only companies and protects national security, but might slow down clean energy growth and make climate goals harder to reach because you typically start off as a small company and then you grow to be a big company, right? So it's going to help the businesses that already do this, who are already operating in the United States and are already large enough to not need these tax credits to stay afloat. And it's going to hurt these smaller businesses that were relying on these tax credits. But again, it's like maybe it's just my personal opinion, but I don't think you should be running a business that requires government tax breaks just to operate, right? If you lose a tax credit from the government and that's the end of your business, you were operating on a margin too close for comfort, in my opinion. I will say that's just my opinion. Obviously, I don't own one of those businesses, so I don't have a bias for or against them. SEC, okay, so 112012, phase out and restrictions on zero emissions nuclear power production credit. Under the current law, there's a credit available for electricity produced by existing nuclear power plants. So this is about nuclear power plants. This is the same thing, but for nuclear specific. Any 501c3 corporation on Earth? What? Let's see. How does this affect 501c3 corporations? So for anybody who doesn't know, like me, a 501c3 is a nonprofit organization that doesn't pay income tax and usually don't owe taxes, so they can't use traditional tax credits directly because they don't have bills to offset. The new provision will change. Transferability is repealed for so under the current law, 501c3 nonprofits could still benefit from carbon capture tax credits in two ways. One, they could partner with a for-profit company, build a project together, and then transfer the credit to that partner in exchange for funding. In other words, selling their credit. Or direct pay, elective pay. Under other recent laws like the Inflation Reduction Act, some nonprofits could elect to get the credit as a direct payment from the IRS. The IRS would pay them. Under the new provision, transferability is repealed, right? So they can't do that. That means 501c3s lose one of their best tools for bringing in outside investment. They can no longer sell their credit through partnerships. It also blocks projects tied to foreign entities, which might matter if a nonprofit is researching or collaborating with international partners. So, most affected are losing out. So nonprofits building carbon capture projects, they may struggle to finance their projects without transferability, especially if they can't use direct pay as an alternative. However, one of the earlier sections I read was about incentivizing the wealthy and or larger corporations to invest in these things. It was a separate part of this whole bill. Incentivizes them to do this. So they have different incentives that are directly go to them instead of incentivizing the small corporation in a way that would ultimately be passed on to the bigger corporation. Universities or nonprofits with foreign research ties could get disqualified. That's interesting. Universities get money from all over the place. But, you know, we're focused on national security now. That's a big part of what this administration has been doing. So, moving on. Section 112013, termination of clean hydrogen production credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a credit per kilogram of qualified clean hydrogen produced for sale or use. This is the same thing, but for hydrogen facilities instead of nuclear. Same shit. See, here you go. Here's another. So people are talking in the comments about how, yeah, this negatively impacts 501cs, but that there has been an overuse of people creating 501cs. So this will reduce, you know, people creating 501cs as a tax loophole, right? So there's sort of a give and take here. Sure, there are obviously plenty of 501cs that are operating legally and created with good intent. And then, but they're incentivized in weird ways, right? Moving on. Section 112014, phase out and restrictions on advanced manufacturing production credit. Under the current law, taxpayers may claim a credit for certain inverters, solar energy components, wind energy components, and battery components manufactured and critical minerals produced. Credit amounts vary by... I think there's a typo here because it says credit amounts vary by, but I think it's vary by component and are listed in the code section. To the extent a taxpayer does not have the tax liability to absorb a credit, the credits are eligible to be transferred. Right, that's going to be taken away. Currently, for components sold during calendar year 2030, there is a 25% reduction to the credit for components sold during calendar year 2031 and 50% reduction for components sold during calendar year 2032, 75% reduction, and no credit allowed after 2032, except for the credit for critical materials produced, which is permanent. Boy, I gotta tell you, all of this big business stuff is a little confusing to me because I don't own a big business. I don't know how many of you are that, knowledgeable about how big business works. So right now, here's what the law does. If you're a company that makes clean energy parts like inverters, solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, you get a tax credit. If you don't need the credit yourself, you can sell it to someone else to raise money. Right, transferability. These credits were set to shrink between 2030 and 32 and disappear by 2033 already. They were already set to expire by 2033. The new provision makes it so that no more tax credits for wind components after 2027. So basically, instead of expiring in 2033, it'll be 2027. First for wind components. Then, all other clean energy parts will lose their credit after 2031, still only 2 years before it was going to be lost anyway. You can't sell or transfer the credit after 2027, and no credit at all if you're a foreign-linked company or you use parts, money, designs, or deals from other countries. So who benefits the most is U.S.-owned clean energy manufacturers. They still qualify for the credit and face less competition from foreign companies. National security and U.S. policymakers keeps China and other adversaries out of U.S. clean tech supply chain. And U.S. mining companies, their credit for critical minerals stays forever because critical minerals is exempt from all of this. Walking Roscoe was saying that 2033 is not that far away. Remember when we partied like it was 1999. We're actually closer to 2033 than we are in 1999, just to be clear. If you weren't feeling old yet, there you go. But also, the next president that comes in, when's the next election? 2028? They'll be able to do all the same shit. They'll be able to pass a bill that repeals or resets these time frames. That's how this works, guys. So everybody who's like, oh, this changes everything forever, like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. A lot of things in here that we've read over are things that were set to expire at a later date, and now they're being repealed so that they expire sooner. The next president is going to have exactly the same option to do that. So who loses the most in this particular section? Small and startup clean energy companies who may rely on selling tax credits. Hopefully you don't have a business that relies on selling tax credits. That's not the way a business is supposed to operate. Wind energy manufacturers, obviously, Donald Trump doesn't believe in wind energy or turbines, so I'm not surprised that that's going away. Let's just ask ChatGPT what it thinks of wind-based clean energy. Using all available current, we'll say up-to-date information, is wind energy a net positive or net negative? Sometimes reading through these things just lead me to questions I haven't really asked before. Why wind energy is a net positive? Environmental benefits. So there's no greenhouse gas emissions or replaces fossil fuels. Reduces air pollution, which lowers asthma, heart disease, and healthcare costs. Economic upside, cheaper than coal and gas in many regions. That's interesting. It's kind of the opposite of what we've been told. Drives rural job creation, especially in wind-heavy states like Texas, Iowa, and Oklahoma. Attracts private investment and stabilizes long-term energy prices. Domestic power generation reduces dependence, blah, blah, blah. Imported fossil fuels, like we have to get gas from elsewhere, right? Helps diversify the energy grid and improves resilience against supply shocks. Interesting. Now, there's something you don't hear about a lot, right? Helps diversify the energy grid. Because if we're just always using gas or coal or something for everything, and there's some coal shortage, then every place that uses coal is out of commission, right? So if we have some places that use wind, at least those places will be unaffected by the things that affect those other things. People want me to compare this to Grok. Let's open up Grok. I'm going to ask it the same question. I'm going to ask Grok the same question right now. This is why I do this live. It's so much fun to see what you guys think in the moment. Let's just finish reading what ChatGPT has to say. So the known drawbacks of wind turbines can harm birds and bats, though new designs and siting rules are helping to reduce this. Land use and aesthetics. Wind farms are land intensive and can face local opposition over noise, appearance, and property values. People don't like the way they look. Intermittency. Wind doesn't blow all the time. It needs backup systems, storage, and grid upgrades to handle variability, and materials and recycling. Turbines use rare earth materials, and blades are hard to recycle, though solutions are emerging. So those are things that are being worked on, but currently not that great. What the experts say. The U.S. Department of Energy, IEA, and IPCC all list wind energy as essential for a low-carbon future. Studies show that wind energy has one of the lowest life cycle carbon footprints per kilowatt hour, even when mining, transport, and decommissioning are included. The bottom line is wind energy is a net positive, clean, cost-effective, and scalable, but it's not perfect, and managing the downsides is part of the long-term clean energy transition. Let's see if Grok says something similar or different. Let's see what its bottom line is. Net assessment. Net positive. Grok says the same thing. Wind energy is a net positive when evaluated holistically, primarily due to its significant environmental and economic benefits. Its ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and its low operational emissions make it a critical tool for decarbonization. Economically, wind power's low LCOE, job creation, and community benefits outweigh initial costs over time, especially as technology improves and costs decline further. Advances in mitigation address many environmental concerns, and the land footprint is minimal compared to fossil fuel infrastructure. Now, Grok does provide counter-arguments. Critics argue wind energy's environmental footprint and social impacts make it less favorable. A 2014 Brookings study suggested wind's net benefits are negative compared to gas combined cycle due to upfront costs. While establishment... Wow, Grok is giving me a lot here. Conclusion. Wind energy is a net positive. It still concludes that it's a net positive due to its substantial contributions to emissions reductions, economic growth, and energy security, which outweighs its manageable drawbacks. Ongoing research into recyclable blades, wildlife mitigation, and grid integration continues to address its limitations. For a homeowner or policymaker, wind energy's long-term benefits, especially in reducing reliance on finite, polluting fossil fuels, make it a cornerstone of a sustainable energy future, provided projects are responsibly sited and community concerns are addressed. So, in this case, Grok and ChatGPT seem to agree. Section 112015, and this will be the last one we do today. Currently, Under the current law, most technologies that were previously eligible for the IRC Section 48 energy tax credit terminated after December 31st, 2024, but geothermal heat pumps that begin construction before January 2035 are still eligible for the Section 48 investment tax credit. So this provision aligns the expiration of the investment tax credit for geothermal heat pumps with the clean energy investment tax credit. There is a 20% credit reduction for facilities placed in service in calendar year 2029. 40%. Okay, so again, this is going to phase out over time. A 40% reduction for facilities placed in service 2031, and no credit available after 2031. So this provision restricts access to the credit for certain prohibited foreign entities, and no credit is allowed for taxpayers that begin 2 years after date of enactment. Just since this is going to be the last one, even though that seems pretty straightforward, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT and Grok what it thinks about that. I like this. We're now comparing answers between Grok and ChatGPT. Oh, Grok had an error. Okay, so ChatGPT breaks it down like this. If you build, let's just put the last part here. If you build a geothermal heat pump system, a super efficient way to heat and cool buildings using underground energy, the government will help you pay for it with a tax credit. Right now, you can get a big tax break if you start building your systems before 2035. So what's changing is the tax credit is going to shrink earlier than expected. No credit at all after 2031, and no credit if your company is connected to foreign countries that we don't trust. That's going to be a common theme, I think. So who benefits the most here is U.S. companies building geothermal systems quickly, U.S.-owned geothermal equipment manufacturers, building owners installing clean energy early, and U.S. policymakers focused on national security. Who loses the most is people or companies who wait too long. Okay, yeah, that it's going away. It was already going away. It's just going away sooner now, to be clear. Foreign-controlled or foreign-influenced companies and people who want geothermal but can't afford it right now, obviously. You got to do it now before the tax breaks goes away. Grok says who benefits the most is U.S. businesses installing geothermal heat pumps, and the companies that make or install them are the biggest winners. Geothermal, I feel like geothermal heat pumps are good, right? Grok's saying basically the same thing. Who loses is foreign companies, especially from countries like China, and businesses that don't act before the deadline, right? So same stuff on both AIs. What was I about to ask? Are geothermal heat pumps good? We'll ask this of Grok and ChatGPT also, and we'll just compare and contrast their answers here. ChatGPT says, yes, geothermal heat pumps are very good, both for your wallet and for the environment. But like anything, it comes with trade-offs, right? Super energy efficient. They use constant underground temperature to heat and cool your home or building. That makes them 3 to 5 times more efficient than regular furnaces or air conditioning. Big long-term savings. You'll pay more up front, but your monthly energy bill drops fast, often saving thousands over time. You may also qualify for tax credits and rebates. Low emissions. Geothermal pumps don't burn fuel, so they produce almost no greenhouse gases, helping to fight climate change and air pollution. And they are quiet and low maintenance. They last a long time. The downsides are the high upfront cost, the need to dig, and specialized installation, right? Not every HVAC company installs geothermals. You need a qualified contractor. So the too long didn't read by ChatGPT is, yes, geothermal heat pumps are very good. They're clean, quiet, and save money long term, but they cost more upfront and take some digging to install. Grok says geothermal heat pumps are good, really good if you've got the money, space, and long-term mindset. They're efficient, eco-friendly, and reliable with tax credits sweetening the deal. let's just reread that provision here regarding this. Now that we know what it is, this provision aligns the expiration of the investment tax credit for geothermal heat pumps with the clean electricity investment tax credit. Okay, so these tax credits are going away. To be clear, they were already going away, but they are going to phase out a little sooner now than they were before. So yeah, I'm going to stop there. We'll continue with section 112016 tomorrow. Thank you everybody for joining me for this live read along. I hope you will return for the next section. Today was boring, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry. I can't control what sections we're going to go over. Thanks for giving a shit. Make sure that you're following me everywhere, subscribed on all the platforms. Instagram, TikTok is important, but YouTube's also important. And more importantly is the Substack. All these links are in my bio. Please like, subscribe, do all the things, and have a great day.